Welcome to the Millennial's Guide to Life podcast. I'm your host Hannah, and I have two guests with me today who are very, very good friends. So say hello, Jenny and James. Say hi.
Hello.
I
Hiya. So today we're going to talk about issues, which I thought was a very good topic and which is personal to me. So before we start off, guys, do you want to introduce yourselves? What do you do? What are you about? What's been happening?
Yeah, sure. Um, so at the moment, I'm currently a student doing psychodynamic therapy. So I continued on from my undergraduate. I'm currently still doing my course, but it's hopefully at the end I'll be qualified psychotherapist. So I've been having sort of a decent eye into a lot of how the business has been going, and also, as we might be chatting about later, a little bit about just how the CVs work with stuff like that. It's quite interesting as well. Just be how it's often a little bit unique, but also has quite a lot of similar problems. I think that we'll be chatting about.
So I am Jenny. I was also did counselling and psychology, um, but although I use it in my everyday working life, I'm not a therapist. I am a mortgage case manager, and I'm very much in the 9 to 5, half 5 working. And I've been through multiple companies and definitely used all of the different CVs, recruitment consultants, and LinkedIn as well when I've been headhunted a couple of times. So I'm quite excited to speak about like, the CVs and explore that a little bit.
Cool. And I am also a graduate of counselling and psychology, and much like Jenny, I am not using that in my work as being a therapist. All right, so we're going to get on with the first question regarding the blog post. For those of you who don't know, there is a blog post written by Collaborative Future where they speak about a new way of hiring employees for different small businesses, and they're looking at this new way of doing things rather than doing a typical CV skim, trying to look at it from a more collaborative and a more, I suppose it's rather creative the way they're doing it. So my first question to ask you guys is, the quote I got from the blog, it says, as a society we invest an eye-watering amount of money in teaching people how to write CVs, forgetting that the CV really only resonates and is dependent on whether the employer and the job role agree. So I want to know, what are your thoughts on this, and is there really any bias when it comes to previewing CVs in terms of hiring people?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. So I think there is actually a bias in terms of writing. I think, as the blog says, there's a yeah. I mean, you can pay people to even write your CVs, and I think that shows that. I mean, if you can make a business out of it, then clearly something's going along with it. And I think being able, there is a certain way to write a CV. Often people will you have to make it very punchy, very like descriptive enough, but not enough, but not short enough that it's people are going to ignore it. And I think it's very limiting, but I understand the reason why, depending on loads of industries. I mean, because even in Jenny, especially in Jenny's line of work, I think just the sheer amount of CVs that are requested and sent, I think it'd just be impossible to go through. So I fully understand the reason why, but I think it's also a bit of a shame as well. I think it boils people down to a very boring aspects of themselves, which are very marketable at one level, but it definitely takes away an aspect of humanity or of the person and what a CV is for.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think along with CVs, especially with biases, there are like many CV libraries, recruitments. People often use recruitment consultants as well, so they will sway through the CVs and then actually follow up with a phone call to get to know you. Because I think actually even like I had my CV professionally written, and just by having my CV professionally written, I found that I was getting contacted a lot more, and the weight was actually much higher. So I think people often judge by, you know, how concise you are when you write your CV. The like how, like, because it usually has to be a page long, and you just have to like have a glance at it and see, do roughly, do you have most of what you're doing now, is it applicable to the new job, and do you have the skill set in this one, like CV, that you'll be able to apply to a new job. So in some sense it's quite handy, especially when I first started, being able to apply for hundreds of jobs, and then get a couple of callbacks from some recruiters and do it that way. But it doesn't quite detail what I'm actually capable of doing and what I do in my day-to-day role. That would have to be interviewed and like discussed. It is quite interesting, and even like I read a study where actually somebody's name can actually have an impact on whether you get contacted or not.
Yeah.
It was primarily down to like if you have like a simple name, like so my name's quite simple to pronounce, that would actually be picked up a little bit more, like unconsciously wise, you're more likely to get picked than somebody who has an incredibly long double barrel whatnot name.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree. I think you're right. It does somewhat limit people in a sense. It limits them to, unfortunately, what they've put on paper. And also, I do think the way things are written, and maybe I think sometimes even the area code. I know as of recently, they've said that they no longer need your number, or I think it's your address, but they still need your number. So you no longer need to put your address on there. But there was a time period where you needed it, and I do think that where you lived also affected whether they picked you as well. I think there is
gender as well, age and gender. Like when I took off my birth, because obviously I was like early 20s, the moment of like one of the recruiters said take off when you were born, and again considered for more because of the amount of experience and my working experience. Like somebody, I've been working since I was like 16, as opposed to someone who's like just left uni with no work experience. So I did working experience. It looks like I'm more experienced and older. And just taking off my like when I was born actually had like a more beneficial effect, and in some cases actually your gender, which is a real shame. Is something that's actually unfortunately considered in, especially in financial services.
Yeah, I've definitely seen quite a few of that. I won't lie. But what are your thoughts about the quote? I think in terms of a CV, it can't represent the person. And the person, I know there are often times, because I also got my CV professionally written, and like Jenny, I did see a huge jump in the amount of people who wanted to hire me. And I realized, I think sometimes it's a disparity between like how things are written as well. It depends on where you live, or where you were located, or how you were educated, which also I suppose comes across as well. But I do like the fact that they said that forgetting it rarely resonates unless it fits the job description, which is true. I wasn't personally in the room, but in one place I was working, I did get to see applicants that were coming in for a particular role, and even though I was a temp at the place, they were still quite honest with me. They were very honest in the fact that they were like, we're not really going to go for these kinds of people, we're going to go for this kind. And I did notice the same biases, mostly male, easy name to read. And I think also they made an unconscious decision because of the easy name. It's probably that they're probably going to be white rather than another race as well, which is something that does come up quite a lot.
Even people work and multiple places where I've worked, they will actually take on an English name, which I really upsets me. Where I've worked in places, we're very multicultural, especially in London, but yet a lot of people I work with will actually take on an English name. They will actually, even writing CVs, they'll have an English name in order to kind of pick this up. So it seems to be quite a prominent thing.
Yeah.
On the point where like how a CV doesn't really paint a picture of the person, it's only a third of the picture. My colleague who was an executive assistant, she's dyslexic, perfectly fine written English, not you wouldn't think it, but I then after doing lots of CVs and like going around because you do pick up quite a lot when you're job hunting, especially in London, it's quite competitive and you're quite new. And I actually learned how to professionally write CVs. And she sent me her CV, which I'm going to be honest is pretty horrendous.
Oh dear.
And she'll forgive me for saying this. She was being offered jobs for like 18 grand. It wasn't much at all. But she was a financial power planner. You have to be very clever to do that. She was an executive assistant as well, so the DM, like, you know, she was a very clever woman, very educated. And I rewrote her CV. And she then started getting job offers for like 28 grand, 30, because I was able to write her experience in a more concise manner, as because she just had like bullet points on a board paper. I looked at it, I was like, what?
So do you think like...
Did you write this when you were 10?
So do you think like the way people write as well affects how people see it?
Oh yeah, I think it definitely does. I mean, it's, and I think again, I think a lot of this also again sort of come back to, I mean, with the long names, with different sounding names, with stuff like that, and I think it's a lot of issues. I think even with it, like there's a class thing involved in it, as well. Like, so, like depending on sometimes where people go to school, like their writing will be completely different, and I think that does show up as well.
The way you speak is a big thing. A lot of them prefer certain accents, and they prefer certain, like, they often, especially when you're in a customer-facing role, you generally have to be quite well spoken. And I even saw I got offered a case manager, like kind of like prompt me, and he was like, you must be well spoken, you must be, you know, like this. And it's like, I had a really good conversation with like the guy who runs our company, and he's black and he's the coolest dude, and we were talking about how people speak, and it was such an interesting conversation, because it is kind of suggesting that unless you are well spoken, or you're kind of southern, you're seen as less intelligent, which makes absolutely sense.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely not the case under any circumstances, but simply because I happen to be southern, and I happen to be fairly like okay sounding, I'm more likely to be picked up for certain roles, just simply because of the way I speak, which is crazy, because I know people who have like a completely different accent who are like far more like they do my job and they make me look like crap. But for some reason, you know, certain things like, I mean, I'm obviously, people don't want people who speak quite aggressively and to be understood, but it does seem to be also another bias that
and I also agree with the whole aggressive sounding thing. Like, for example, with me, I can definitely say depending on who picks up the phone with me, my accent will change, because naturally, I suppose if I was to talk like this to you all the time, do you know what I mean, and just keep talking like this all the time, certain people won't want to continue listening. But if I switch it up and then I sound a little bit more standard, you know, then people are more likely to, I suppose, hear what I have to say, which is a sad thing, because I know a ton of intelligent people, and I do know it's a stereotype that really only black people sound like this. So I know a ton of intelligent black people who, they may not sound, you know, like the Queen, but they're like super intelligent as well, which is kind of a shame that all of that plays into it, really.
I have an advisor who's black, and she gets 5-star reviews every single week. She is phenomenal, and I'm always like telling her how proud I am and how impressed she's so young, and she's incredible at what she does. And again, she switches her accent when she's speaking to clients, which I suppose in some sense, like, you do have to be concise, but there is like definitely like a difference in the way they speak, because sometimes when she's talking to me about stuff, she does go, she does switch it up. Like the other day, she told me that she was going to go off and knock a developer out because he was pissing her off.
Yeah, no, I do. I definitely agree that it is a bit of a shame that a lot of people have to change their accents in order to, in a matter of terms, get hired, but it is the sad reality. But the cool thing is that Collaborative Futures is deciding to do things a bit differently. They are trying to do things in a way where you actually demonstrate what you have, and they get to see it physically in some form or another. Like, for example, with this podcast, this is a way of showing them that I have an ability to take a brief and put it into action. So for example, for this brief, it was to create something to speak about the different way that Collaborative Future is hiring, and which I personally, after reading and having a good look about it and even being a partaker of it myself, I felt like it does need to be spoken about, because we do need to change how we do the hiring process. So which is very interesting, the first thing they did is they gave me an application form and they said, we want you to answer 3 questions, and that's it. No CV, no cover letter, no nothing. So you go in, you give your date of birth, your name, where you live, your availability, and then you just answer 3 questions, which are all very, I'd say, personal, but not too personal, very interpersonal. So they want to know about you. How do you view yourself as an individual rather than as a candidate? Because, sometimes when you apply for certain jobs, they ask you, how do you view yourself? And you start to think as a candidate because you want them to hire you. You don't actually be honest and truthful.
What am I actually good at?
Yes, exactly. You start going, oh God. But with them, they were like, no, we want to know what you think your best strengths are. And even for me, when I was applying at the time, it was very difficult to think of things because, again, I'm so used to thinking in a candidate mindset. But I had a chat to a coach of mine. Shout outs to Ahmed. I had a chat with a coach of mine, and sorry, I am from South London, I have to do it. I had a chat with him and he was like, so what different things have built you from when you were younger till now? And talk about those things. And after we had a conversation, it's really deep, right? And then after we had that conversation, he made me realize, like, there's so many things about me that's good I could talk about, but then we had to narrow it down to 3 because that was the question. And I was like, that's, but it was
so many things.
But it was so interesting because the question wasn't phrased like, sell yourself to us. The question is, what are the 3 valuable things you think we should know about you? It was never, what 3 valuable things do you possess? Can you bring to the business? It was, what do you think we should know about you that would be valuable? And I thought, that's quite a different question. It's very different. So then we move ahead, and then there's another question. Forgive me, I cannot remember. It was quite a blur answering all the questions. But I think that one in particular stuck with me. That one in particular stuck with me. A couple, they said, what is it about this role that you actually are interested in?
Yeah, what do you
what actually do you want to do in this? Like, what are you looking for? What is it you want to cultivate at the end of this? And I thought, that's also very different. So going along with those questions, I wanted to ask, do you think we should take more of that kind of interpersonal approach? That kind of, maybe you should tell me more about you and what you possess that you are proud of, that you can do. Or should we keep it the way we've kept it, things? Or maybe we should modify it a little bit. What do you think?
I think it's one of those things, and I can't remember what I heard it from. I think it's from a therapy sort of thing, but it's always, you always ask about someone. I know it's a police thing, but sometimes you hear about it in psychodynamic sort of work. They use it, and it's asking a person about their day, about themselves, rather than an event or something, and people will be able to talk a lot more easily about it.
Right.
They find applying it to so the police, for instance, will ask a person about their day rather than, and up until that point,
yes,
what happened. And psychotherapy, it's usually best to ask a person usually about how they are doing in that particular thing that led up to maybe an event that triggered them or something like that. But But it's that when you ask someone about themselves and their self-interest, it means that often they'll connect to it more. They want to, which I think is slightly different, rather than asking what makes you want to take on this job or role, which is taking. It's difficult to explain, but it's trying to place yourself outwards rather than place yourself in.
Yeah, you're trying to take yourself out of yourself and put yourself in, I suppose, the mind space that they want you to be in. I suppose it's like the frame of mind they want you to answer with, which I suppose can be very, I don't know if it's disillusioning, but it can be quite overwhelming for some people as well. It could be.
Well, it's difficult to comprehend what this hypothetical role you may or may not have will entail, like
right.
And it's with customer services, sometimes you get told you'll just be crunching numbers when in actuality you're dealing with people most of the day, and it can be vice versa in another role, but often this role is a big unknown, and you're not really sure what to expect unless it's highly specific.
I suppose it's a good way as well to kind of like really hone in on the person individually, because I think a lot of companies are definitely, especially in my company, that they're a big believer in that you can train anyone to do the job. You can't train people to be motivated and actually do the job.
That's true.
So I suppose it would be like somebody can look fantastic on paper, they can be fantastic in interview, but then once you've employed them, they'll just sit and do nothing all day. So I suppose it's a good way. He's trying to see how well people can actually implement themselves, get to know all these people, get along with the people that we've already hired, because I think office politics can be incredibly damaging to a business anyway.
Yes,
so
it can. Yeah.
In this sense, it's kind of a good way to really kind of get a snapshot of the person and the individual, as opposed to like doing like multiple processes. I'm still quite torn by it, just because it sounds like it would take up a lot of time. And this is me being me. Sounds like it would take up a lot of my time as opposed to email 30 CVs.
Oh no, it's a time sink trying to get to know somebody.
A lot of my time.
Yeah.
Job, like when I first left, I needed to send my CV out to everyone. I was like, whoever wants to pay my rent can have me.
Yeah. Oh no, man, it's a time sink to get to know somebody. Yeah, exactly. It's like I spend a year just about scratching the surface of people, and
so there's a part of me that's cool because it's easy to send out a CV and easy to have a conversation with a recruiter, and then easy to have like interviews. But even with the trial period, so people have a 3 months probation, but you've got the job, whereas the trial period, you will be investing a lot of your time for that 1 month. You don't even know if you got the job, and then if something were to happen and you don't get the job, that's 1 month you yourself has wasted.
Yeah.
Where I've been looking elsewhere, so I'm quite mixed in how I feel about this. I like some aspects of it, but if it was to be fully implemented, I would worry about the people who do generally need a job and don't have that time to focus a whole month on one thing when they could focus a tiny bit on 30 things.
That's true.
Get something that suits them. So I don't know, I'm still on the fence.
No, I get it, it's true. I was thinking about it and I thought it's quite nice initially because, you know, you're very used to transactional, it's almost like, all right, I don't want to make this comparison, but it's almost very clinical, you know, like how clinical psychologists are in comparison to therapists. It's very like, I want to wash my hands off you. It's very sterile. But like, I'd say again, this is more of a therapy. I'd say it's more of a therapeutic approach, this way of doing it. But you're right, it would be time consuming.
That's an extra person to try and go through, depending on how long they write or how long they do things for, a whole person sort of
both sides as well, like as opposed to a 2-minute check on the CV. He was like, person like for a month. At least if that's what they mean. Like, I don't know, I might have read it wrong.
I think what it is you answer the questions as truthfully as possible, honestly, and they will get back to you. But the cool thing about it is I'm still in the process, so I'm kind of like the best person to ask questions to, even though this is supposed to be the other way round. But I'm in the middle of the process, so I got the email from them and they're like, hi, we really liked what you said and we want to have an interview with you, but we also want you to show your skill, which I thought honestly, I thought it was going to be another aptitude test, and as much as I can do aptitude tests, I despise them because I feel like it's limiting me.
Like, the psychology tests. Like, are you agreeable? Are you like coming? Like,
oh god, the amount of times I've done those surveys, I can't.
Like,
and then it's.
I have a strong opinion about workplaces using
podcast.
Yeah, it's
any company that comes to me and goes, do this personality test, which is the most nonsensical thing.
Honestly,
there's so much evidence to suggest it's rubbish. And the companies, and I'm like, are you agreeable or are you compliant? I was like, well, what if I'm neither? And what if I'm feeling more compliant this day and less compliant that day? Anyway, rant over.
No, definitely do rant. I definitely agree. Again, maybe it's just because we've studied it for so long. It's like, I just think personality tests are so bogus because a human being is so complex. Their mind, where they are, depending on whatever state, they're so complex. How can you define them to, like, I don't know, what do they call it? ENTJ? I don't know what it is now.
I mean, you can cheat with them as well. You can, like, if a person's really desperate for that specific job, then
God knows I have.
Yeah, I mean, you can look up those tests because they usually use the bare bone simple ones, and you can just cheat very easily.
And you know, they hired they hired a consultant that says they've done marketing psychology for so many years, and you just look and you think, have you really? But again, that's my rant over. Anyway, I really despise aptitude tests. I don't like them. The only way I feel that they are useful is when it applies to the role itself. But I do notice that many jobs offer aptitude tests because they just want to see your abilities. And it could just be that you choose to do it on a wrong day. It happens, and things go left. But the cool thing about collaborative futures is when they gave me my, I suppose, quote unquote aptitude test, they said, you've chosen your interview date, so you have all the time in between now and then to do your test, and we want you to dedicate 3 hours whenever you want, however you want to do it, to that test, which was basically demonstrate your skill set. And I thought, all right, what skill set? And so they offered, and they said, we want you to find a way of promoting our new way of hiring, so what they're doing currently. And I looked through the list and I saw,
they're using you for free. If they're gonna see this, I have words with them. I'm joking. You can cut that.
It's all good. It's all
good.
It's all good.
Yeah, we really want to look at a humanistic way. Please work for us for free. Anyway, feel free to cut that bit out.
I will. No worries. But so that I just saw a list of things, and I thought, the only thing that really stood out to me, because again, I'm studious, but I'm also creative. I don't like project management. I love people who are organized. I really do. I am organized chaos. So everything is organized, but it's still chaotic. I'm like, you know when they say chaotic energy? I'm literally the embodiment of that. So it's like, when I look at stuff like that, I get antsy because I can't fit in that pretty little box. So when I saw a bunch of creative options and I saw that there was an opportunity to do a video or a podcast, I thought, one says I can go outside in the cold and the other says I can stay in my house. I'm gonna do the podcast.
Plus, pandemic and all that, so usually best just to...
Which one went and landed me in hospital?
Yeah.
Right, of course. But it's also pretty... I also like the fact that it was offered and they said, you don't even have to stick to the list. You can do anything you want to demonstrate how you want to promote this. And I thought, you know what? It's quite interesting that they asked you to figure out your own way of demonstrating your skill set. It gives you this sort of, forgive me if I mispronounce the word, my English is horrible sometimes, autonomy. It's like, okay. Sometimes I get the words wrong, please forgive me, but it's like, I've never applied for anything where they've said, all right, we want you to show us how you use your skill set at its best point, which I thought it was rather interesting, because normally when they want you to demonstrate it, they're gonna get you in the interview room and they're gonna ask you questions and you're gonna sit there sweating blood run cold, thinking I've messed up every single question thus far, so we can bank on this one. But in this case, they're like, we don't really want to do all that first. We just want to see what you can do, and then afterwards, in the interview, that's what we're going to talk about. So there's no grilling questions, no weird scenarios where they say, in a bowl of fruit, what fruit are you? I don't understand those kinds of things, but I've had a few weird interview workshops in my lifetime.
Jesus Christ.
It is all I just add it to my experience. The weirdest one was when they said, choose your animal. And I said, choose my animal. And they said, we just want you to pick an animal that represents you and be truthful to yourself. And the amount of people who bold-faced lied in the room, they were like, I'm an eagle and I'm a wolf. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to be honest, because I'd rather be honest and lose the job than lie. Because if I get the job, I'm going to have to act like one of them animals, and I'm not about that. So when they were like, oh yeah, just demonstrate your skill set, I thought that's quite interesting. Do you think companies should take on that kind of mindset that like, oh, you know, they look for certain skill sets and sometimes how they want you to demonstrate it is through their means. But do you think they should allow the candidate to have autonomy and demonstrate it through their own means?
I think it's between that argument that we were having earlier between like practicality and actually getting to know the person, and I think that's a really difficult thing, because autonomy can mean just about anything in that regard, especially to whether you get a job. And I think again, I'm very impressed by this company that they're willing to sort of go through like a podcast like this. But I mean, I think it's always that battle between what can maybe two people in HR, if they're really big, maybe three, but while dealing with other things, actually get through, and how much can they get through in that amount of time? And I think it's one of those things where it's one of those things where we need to decide on what is autonomy, but within a limit, I think,
right.
And it's how you want to strict the limit.
I think it's a good way of weeding out the people who don't actually really want to put in the effort as well. Like, for example, if somebody said, hi, just throw in your CV and we'll give you a call, I'll be like, yeah, sure. But if someone said, can you do a whole podcast and talk about this and then have an interview, I'd be like, I'm not.
Skills.
There are 4 other jobs that just want my CV and an interview, and I know I can do the job. I haven't got time for this, so I suppose it would weed out people like me.
And then there's like the rest of us who are desperate.
Yeah. But then, so it will be good for the person who's applying for the job, because if they generally want it and they're very keen to do it, and they're willing to show that, yes, I'm willing to work hard because they're willing to do this, they're more likely to probably hire someone that's actually really good for the job. Like you.
Shameless plug.
Someone like me who is just like, don't waste my time.
Did I ever tell you about how much Hannah is a hard-working person?
Did I ever tell you that you should definitely employ her?
This is not a sponsored ad.
I'll send you our address later.
But I do think that they've been quite, which again, but though I suppose it is because they are a rather progressive, creative establishment, that might explain why they're a bit more open to this sort of, I guess, interpersonal way of hiring. Which must mean they have like maybe a lot of people or a ton of time, whichever one it is. But I do think it's quite interesting that they are. I understand as well why they would campaign for there to be change in how we hire people, but I suppose in a way, to not fully criticize it, there needs to be, like Jenny said, a balance where it's like, how do you balance the learning about the person, getting the honestly learning about the person, having them demonstrate their skills in a way that doesn't waste your time or their time. And they've managed to do one thing, which again, it interests me, honestly. So what they've said is look, everybody applies, and whoever gets through to that first round will do what I'm doing, create something to promote this particular methodology. And if you don't make it past the interview, you get paid for the time you spent. And of course, if you move on and you get further interviews and you get the role, you're going to be paid then anyway. And I don't think you get paid for the time because you're already on payroll, I suppose. But I did think it was quite interesting that they were like, well, if you don't get the job, we don't want to fully waste your time, so we will pay you for the time you spend. So have some sort of remuneration. Now, this might be slightly controversial, but do you think companies should take up that mentality? For those who make it to interview.
I have my first rant on this. So.
Oh, okay.
So in psychotherapy, there's a lot of placement work. You need to meet usually about 100 hours for most courses, and then to actually be part of one of the two governing bodies, you need to meet about 150 hours. That usually you can take the 100 from what you've done from the course and continue on. But for all that time you never get paid. And that I always think is utterly disgraceful, because a lot of these charities, NHS work, all this stuff specifically relies on these trainee therapists, and their models are built out that they don't pay too many established therapists, solely rely on these trainees, which is insane sometimes. Because I've both my course mates and even myself, I had complex clients who do require some people who have more experience, and the fact that they're not paid at all, just from the emotional health aspect, but the fact that even a lot of, I think maybe outside of London, occasionally they get paid for travel, but often rarely. And that I just think is disgraceful in the amount of, and I think it's like that for anything. And maybe it's just me talking from maybe in the mental health sort of sector, but I think it's insane for the amount of stuff that you absorb that you aren't compensated, and often you're just passing along. At least when we could do face-to-face, it was so weird at points receiving money that you worked for that hour, you listened to that, or 50 minutes. And some way, for now I only have 3 clients, which is pretty standard, but some of my peers have sometimes 7, 8 people who are working at a university or NHS or are doing a placement there. And that's just insane. They're still doing 50 minutes. It's just for less amounts of weeks. So for people not knowing, you can either the standard for most NHS and university places will do 6 weeks of therapy, at a pinch maybe 12. But yeah, and I mean, because of its short term on that side, but the sessions are still as long. They receive more clients, but it's just insanity that not even being paid for that type of work, and not at least being paid travel, not being at least paid a little bit. It's crazy for the amount of, especially for people training. Yes, sorry. So that was my small rant, my small rant with stuff.
I definitely concur with that as well. Obviously I work in the finance sector, so I'm generally paid, but also yes, definitely paid for the time that they're there. If you're taking out like I said earlier, if you're sending out loads of CVs and you're there for the month and you don't get the job and you're not paid, that is a waste of my time. Especially if I'm somebody that needs to pay a rent, or if I've got kids to feed. And not only that, but if I'm working to assist a business to help them make money, to help them increase profits, and I'm doing it for free, they've basically stolen time from me.
Yeah.
and even in my company, I do expect to be like, luckily we get paid overtime, but because sometimes the role entails that you have to work horrendous hours, but then that kind of sense I'm working ridiculously in my trade to make somebody else a lot of money.
Yeah.
I expect to at least be paid to feed myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, if they were to do the model of like having people for a month for a trial period, 100% should they be paid, especially if they don't get the job, because again they're putting people at risk who could have been looking elsewhere for another job. They could have been trying elsewhere, doing elsewhere for a job that they could have got. So it is, you know, it's I suppose it's good for them because they find someone that they can actually demonstrate what the person can do to see if they're fit for the company, and if they do pay them, it'll be good because at least you got like a month of experience and like paid as well. So
Yeah.
What about?
I agree.
Great. What about? Let's tailor it even more to this. So what they're even doing is, even at the application stage, which is, I suppose it's unheard of, and again it's radical in a sense. How do you feel about companies having the mentality of paying you for the time you spent on an application?
What, on the actual CV?
No,
I would run.
no.
I'd apply for a job for at least 10 times. I've been like, we've got 20 applicants. I'm like, Jenny 1, Jenny 2, Jenny 3,
Jenny Smith, Jenny Gooding,
everything. I'll be like, yeah, that's me. That's all.
So like for example,
Jenny Hancock.
Just be me there 20 times.
like 30 times, just
For that reason, it's probably not
and
a
then
good
at
idea.
some point it just becomes like binary code for J and S. Okay, so in the case of this, so for example, what they're doing with me is I am in the second stage of application. So I've done my bit, I've done the first half. They like me. Yay.
That's always
You're further up in the Hunger Games.
Yeah. But now we're at this stage where they're like, we want you to create something to show us your skills. And we want to pay you if you don't make it through. Now, if we were to apply this to different industries, again, this is quite, the way they've done it is quite particular to them. But if this was to be applied, if this methodology was to be applied to other industries, like for example, if you go in for an initial interview and then they invite you in for a second on a group workshop, should you be paid for the time you went to the second interview in the group workshop if you don't get the job? Because that's what this is the equivalent of.
I mean, so there's a part of me that also goes, how do they? Depends how much are their actual workers paid, and how much are these people who are doing like the runarounds being paid? Because if it's less, one could argue, and they're probably not in the slightest doing that, but it'd be a very good business model if you get like these free workers every couple of months with 0-hour contracts, and you just give them like cash in hand.
Yeah.
Make quite a bit of business.
It's not morally sound, I'll tell you that.
Great way to make money anyway, and get people to do stuff for you. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yes, I'm just yes to being paid.
Because I
think it would depend what sort of
motive.
Yeah, I mean, if it's say like a workshop or maybe a day, then pay for travel. But I think, but I mean, if it's something like you're there, like you're consistently doing it for like a week or something like that, then again, I think it, at the very least, because again, you're taking it out of people's own time. I think at the very least paying for travel. But I mean, that also, I think as Jenny said, it's pretty nice getting like everyone a couple months, a couple of free people who are gonna push themselves on this certain job.
If there's a carrot at the end, they might work really hard for those months, and then never get there, and then they get the fresh badge. I mean, obviously that is a very, very dark way of looking at it, and I'm sure that's not their intention.
rather.
When you work in finance for a couple of years,
you start to see the dark side of life.
I've heard of some interesting sort of second round of interviews from lawyering background at points, depending on what sort of what type of organisation. Usually, it's more wealthier sort of ones, but often they'll have a group sort of interview. So they'll have some of the partners there, and then the person will go in. Now, this is usually maybe second or third interview, but I think that's a good way in terms of, although probably very scary for the person, they also keep it as relaxed as an interview can be. Again, this depends on the organisation, but I think that's a good way to, and again, it depends on the interviewers, but and the interviewee on how it is. But I think that method is a nice way of getting to know your bosses, so long as it's done in a more casual way, and rather than a sort of court trial sort of way. It's I think, but in terms of whether it being paid for an hour or two, I would say probably no. I just don't, although it would waste a person's time, paying someone for that amount of time wouldn't be cost effective, depending on how many people you will see through. But if it's for a week, if it's or even for a day, then at least paying for travel costs, so that nothing is really, I mean, time is lost, but at the very least, there isn't a financial worry. If you, especially in London, where and heck, even if you're coming from outside of London, that travel costs will at least be met, and I think businesses should equate that into a funding when trying to find people, because I think it shows a goodwill in a lot of companies that they are to, if you are valuable to them and you and that they can take care of you.
Yeah, I suppose it'd be more. I don't want to say the word incentive because that sounds superficial.
It's a show of good faith.
Right, yeah, exactly. And I think more people would be inclined to put their all into it once they know that, oh, you actually care about me as the individual. I'm not just a number. Yeah. Which I think that
as the cynic, if you're interviewing, say there's like 20 of you guys, and you all have to do this, and you've all got like a podcast of 3 people, what's 20 times 3? That's 60 people in one round.
So while you're looking at me, I'm horribly
60 people that you've just advertised their company to. So like 2 hours of pay, I don't think it's too bad, you know. If you're advertising their company for them, like, yeah, maybe that is a good incentive. And you haven't even got the job yet. That's not amazing.
Thank you. But yeah, that's something I wanted to talk about, because I thought it was quite interesting. I kind of liked the idea in theory, though I have a couple questions about its practice, because as much as we can say, oh, it can be applied to different industries, and different industries can have different ways of giving candidates autonomy and weeding out those who are just desperate for a job and those who actually want the role. I suppose you could apply the paid method for how much time you take putting your hours in outside of whatever you're doing, assuming you're working, even if you're not, putting hours in to present this project to these people to show that you have the capability to start and finish something. Just putting that in there. I suppose it can be applied, but then I also think why overhaul? I know I'm gonna get like questions about this in the interview, but why overhaul an entire methodology? Why not modify it? I do like the idea of giving the candidate autonomy to present their skills. Could there be a way of doing that without taking too much time? For example, if you send in your CV and then they send you an email back saying we've received it, could you do this for us in 2 weeks' time and submit it? Is that something plausible? Could that be something that people could create I suppose, something based on their skill set and show their competency without having to do a standardized Indeed test, picking different pictures of flowers.
But I mean, if you don't get a dandelion, then what's the point?
I think if like someone came back, if I sent my CV in and then they emailed me and asked me to do something, I'd be like, no, pay me first. Interview me first. So I probably wouldn't do it. If this was me, I would not have got this job.
Which might be why they've tailored it to you. They've gone, you know, if we ask them to do that and we don't pay them, this would be a bad idea. So we're going to pay you if you don't get it.
I'll be like, absolutely not.
Oh,
you keep 0-hour contract.
I mean, it's difficult to know what would like what's in that limited sort of space, because I mean again, like doing a podcast like this is doable, but it's also thinking up other people's sort of time as well. I mean, like but I mean, it's how creative can someone be in 2 weeks is the question in something like that, and like and as I was saying, like creativity within a limit. Like it's yes, I ask you, the person who will be like seeing this, what do you think? No, but
But no, it is a question I would like to pose to them. Like, how can this? I'm sure there's different ways. I'm sure they've done a couple studies, and I mean, again, on the blog they did trial it with forgive me, I forget the name. I think it is William James Design. I may have said the wrong name, please forgive me.
And how'd it go? Complete other business. No, I'm joking.
So with them, they trialed it and they ended up actually hiring the person on long term. But even before they got to that point, they took on this methodology and they asked the interpersonal questions and asked them to demonstrate their skill set however they would wish to demonstrate it. And then they went on to the interview, and it seems that the again, this is always a lottery, I think. So again, I don't know if this will necessarily improve employment rate, but you also have to have a good connection with the interviewer or HR, whoever it is, whoever's employing you, because you can do like the most astounding advert, you know, rain dropping from the ceiling, like Titanic over in the corner, you know what I mean? You could do all of that to promote whatever they're doing, and then when you come to meet them face to face, there's no ability to connect and understand each other, and then not only have you wasted your time, you've wasted the company's time. So again, I'm asking this so you ask me in the interview. I don't know how you would. I'm unsure how this would be implemented into other industries. Not saying it's impossible. I definitely think it's possible, but like with most things, it may need to be modified. But I do think it's different. Is it the best decision to completely adopt this methodology, or should we hold it off for now? What do you think?
I think like aspects yes, and aspects no. Like even just like again, I'm such a cynical human being. It's to pieces. If every single company now, like in a lot of places, like if you hop to job to job, that doesn't look good because that obviously shows issues in your employability. If you have long periods of not being employed, obviously not with the pandemic, that's a completely different like scenario.
Completely different beast.
And you know, it sometimes suggests that if something might not be, and there's many reasons, but sometimes like if there are gaps in employment, it can make you look a bit harder to employ. And one of the things is, if every company did this, you had a trial period for every company. For example, if you went for 3 companies and you had a trial period, whether you didn't like it or they didn't like it, that's 3 months you've been out of employment or in continuous different employments. And an employer will probably look at that and be like, so why didn't these other 3 employers take you on what's going on here? This is coming from someone that's been fired from like 3 out of 4 jobs. So, yeah, no, it would. I suppose it would be a good sense because you could like kind of see where people are struggling or not struggling, but it would also be a bad sense because you can't cover your tracks as easy as you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, this isn't real shared, is it, Alec?
Yeah. No. It was very, very insightful because I initially I was like, I don't know how I'm going to discuss this, and then when I actually had a read through, I thought actually I have a lot of questions. But it's nice that in the same way, not trying to fully critique, but I can't help but critique certain aspects because I'm thinking it's great. This would work great for the creative sector, honestly, because it would weed out and it would encourage so many people who maybe, for example, if this was a design agency, let's say you wanted to work in concept art for games, but you don't have a portfolio. If you can take 3 hours and, conceptualize something and send it and say, I've done this between this time and that time, and present it forward, then they can decide based on what you've done, whether it fits in with the vibe of the company or not. I can see it working I suppose, in those areas, but in areas like, tech and finance.
Like nursing.
It's tricky. Yeah, trying to save a life.
A bit awkward.
Go into the streets and find somebody and no, but I mean, I think it's like no, I think it's one of those things where it's difficult. I think as you said, Hannah, it's one of those things that need to be modified. It's definitely it'd be true. It's difficult to know on a larger scale how it would work, and I think maybe not entirely cynically, but I think much like a CV and much like anything else, people will make a script for themselves. Will and obviously with say something like this, but it's a little bit less so. But I think people will always try and find an easier route around it, and especially, I mean, you take with game design or even any sort of design thing, copyright and stealing of art and anything like that is very doable and quite easy if people know how to do it correctly.
Very true.
And I mean, I think it's one of those things that I would love to see more, being able to represent more of yourself in a job. It'd be brilliant, but the way of being able to weed people out, I think is tricky. And like any sort of, whether that's a CV or whether that's an interview, and people can be very different to themselves when they know that there is a carrot at the end of the stick.
I think it would be good for people who struggle with your typical recruitment process, for example.
Oh yeah.
My colleague who's dyslexic, but is she was an executive, assistant, financial power planner. Woman knows her numbers, and she's a salesperson as well. She's now her own mortgage advisor, does all the sales and stuff like that, but can't write a fucking email to say that. Which I can, that's why I'm case management. She does the deals, I do the customer stuff.
Great.
So, it would be really good for people like those who do struggle with, having a presentable CV, because that CV did not reflect her incredibility as a worker and employer. She's brilliant. So it'd be good for people who do struggle, and also again, it takes a lot of literacy skills. You have to know recruiters as well. You have to be on the phone. There's just so much other people who will struggle with your typical recruitment process, as opposed to maybe someone like my colleague who would probably benefit really well from this. Someone said, "Hi, we need you to role play mortgage advice and show us how you can demonstrate these skills." She would have smashed it. They would have taken her on immediately. So I suppose it's really good for people more diverse, which I think is really cool, and it takes away those biases that we have spoken about earlier as well. You do get to know the person, you do get to know what they're capable of, and and you get some really interesting stuff out of it. So yeah, I think it's I'm for and against.
Fair enough. Right, I'm gonna do a nice little change here. How do you think this would fare considering our current world situation, whatever you want to call it, Miss Coronavirus, who has made herself very readily available for everybody? Do you think this methodology, in terms of, putting out an application form, having it very simply done, not unnecessarily long, where you answer a bunch of questions, put in your educational history and all of that stuff, which I guess it's useful. But instead of putting all that, you answer your name, your date of birth, your availability, and the 3 questions. And then moving on, being given a task to demonstrate your skills, and then having an interview to talk about that. Do you think that's something that's more viable in this time, in this economic climate? Would that be a more viable option than what we've previously been used to? Or do you think, again, we should still modify what we have used and combine the two?
I think definitely modify, not implement this. And again, going back to the people who there have been mass redundancies, and it's time consuming. To do like this, to have the interview and to do the application process and to have it all within 2 weeks. Like a lot of places where you shove in your CV, the recruiter calls you the same week, you have an interview the following week, you then start the role. So I would personally, probably the worst time to implement it when there's such job scarcity and there's like mass redundancies and people are struggling to, survive. So for me, I wouldn't be so sure if it's like such a viable thing. It would need to be modified because again, if someone said to me, it'd be like, oh, you seem desperate for a job, do you want to do this, I'd be a bit like, oh. But I suppose that in some sense they're also paying for it. So again I'm a bit on the fence.
Yeah,
I think it's a good idea and a bad idea at the same time.
Yeah, I think maybe because I'm on the receiving end of it right now, I'll be a bit honest, my economic and employment situation has not been the most graceful. In fact, it's the thing I'm the most ashamed of, because of all things, I'm pretty good at pretending to be normal, so I can do all the normal stuff.
We all do.
And the one
saying that one is normal, just from the experience of people I've met through.
Trust me, I'm a therapist.
Yeah, so along with all of that and all the masking and, because of my disability, I've learned from a very early age how to assimilate. So often I forget, sometimes I'm playing a character and I'm not playing myself, and my actual self has many struggles with the recruitment process. I just cannot read people in terms of they want me to present myself a certain way when all I can be is like what I am. It's very difficult to do that unless like I'm in a play, then that's like God-given, I can do that easily. But to have that mindset and know what the interviewer wants to hear and what they don't want to hear, and to not sound too much what they want to hear, I've never had that ability. So it's not as simple. So maybe, I suppose in this case, maybe for this methodology, this is more for the people who, like me, maybe have learning disabilities and just struggle reading people. This might be an easier way of demonstrating that, you're skillful. It's just you don't have the right tools to, I suppose, put it across. So from my perspective, I mean, it's not, oh Lord, we're back. It's not a godsend, but it's definitely welcome. I will say that.
Easy for those people. Like I definitely got the same. Like I got like learning challenges, and like you mentioned with my employment history. So I suppose it would be down people who aren't as employable. And it wasn't so much me. It was generally like I didn't get along with management. Whereas this job, they will specifically train me that suits me. But because of that, I even got like the best feedback. I got an incentive this week for the best feedback, the highest figures of my department. So it doesn't ever necessarily say that just because I've got like learning challenges or whatever that I'm like less able, which some people think. And again, even with just a simple CV, like my ex-colleague who was dyslexic, far more skillful than anyone I could imagine in the mortgage industry. But it definitely like would help those kind of people who would then struggle with the normal recruitment process, just to demonstrate hands-on. to demonstrate what they're capable of.
Well, on a positive note, I have a question to ask, because everybody does little things. They've been doing little things in the pandemic. Have you guys started binge watching anything? And if so, please give me the details.
Ooh, that's a tricky one. I've been watching a ton of stuff. Been binge watching a bunch of anime stuff, catching up
Ooh.
lots of shows that I may have missed. But I think shows wise, I've caught up with The Mandalorian, which one of my friends gave me his account password and details because, as I found out, he'd been using my Netflix account, and as an apology, a latest apology, because my mum had given his mum's, my mum had given our Netflix account to his mum, who then passed it on to him. And I'd always seen this profile in the corner, and I was like, oh, it must have just been a one-off sort of thing. Nope, turns out my friend had been using it the entire time. This was an apology from him. So I've been catching up on a bunch of Disney-related stuff as of late. Yeah, living my Disney princess life.
Yes, Disney princess life. I've heard that The Mandalorian's actually quite good. My sister, she got Disney Plus for herself as a birthday present. But to be fair, she is a hardcore Disney fanatic, so it just seems normal for her to have it. Yeah, but I have heard good stuff about The Mandalorian, and like everybody is like super tuned in, and people are very excited for WandaVision and the next phase of the whole Marvel series and all the stuff like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm gearing for like WandaVision. That looks sick.
Yeah, it does look very interesting. I won't lie to you, though. I'm waiting for Ironheart really, because that's a superhero that has my heart. She's an intelligent black girl that gets picked up by Tony Stark. I mean, what more could you want, really, honestly? So, so that's what I'm waiting for. Honestly, I'm just waiting for Tony Stark, wherever he is, if he's real. I'm over here, just to let you know. But anyway, I'd like to thank you guys so much for coming on this podcast. I hope we can do this again, because I want to talk about other stuff. So if you guys are down to do this another time, please do let me know. And yeah.